Speaker Gingrich, you presided as Speaker over several foreign aid budgets for the United States, and I remember covering in 1995 the intervention on behalf of the Mexican peso. You have seen at times the proper role of the United States through foreign aid and other interventions. I want to know if you agree with Governor Perry about starting at zero.
Absolutely. I mean, what he said made absolutely perfect sense. Why would you start every year? I mean, consider the alternative. You're giving some countries $7 billion a year. So you start off, or in the case of Egypt, $3 billion a year. So you start off every year and say, here's your $3 billion, now I'll start thinking. You ought to start off at zero and say, explain to me why I should give you a penny. And let me tell you, the fact that the Pakistanis, think about this, the Pakistanis hid bin Laden for at least 6 years in a military city within a mile of their National Defense University, and then they got mad at the people who turned him over to us, and we think those are the acts of allies? I think it's a pretty good idea to start at zero and sometimes stay there.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Speaker. Since you mentioned Egypt, Mr. Speaker, I just want to know if you were president, if the aid that we currently provide on an annualized basis to Egypt would be completely rethought and possibly eliminated if you were president.
It would certainly be completely rethought, and candidly, the degree to which the Arab Spring may become an anti-Christian spring is something which bothers me a great deal, and I would certainly have the State Department intervening on behalf of the Coptic Christians who are being persecuted under the new system, having their churches burned, having people killed, and I'd be pretty insistent that we are not going to be supportive of a regime which is explicitly hostile to religions other than Islam.
Senator Santorum, if a Pakistani nuclear weapon goes missing, what do you do?
Well, let me just stop back and say I disagree with a lot of what was said up here. Pakistan must be a friend of the United States for the reason that Michele outlined. Pakistan is a nuclear power, and there are people in that country that if they gain control of that country will create a situation equal to the situation that is now percolating in Iran. So we can't be indecisive about whether Pakistan is our friend. They must be our friend. And we must engage them as friends, get over the difficulties we have, as we did with Saudi Arabia, with respect to the events of 9/11. The terrorists came from Saudi Arabia, and we said, well, you know what? It's important for us to maintain that relationship in spite of those difficulties. And it's important for us, with a nuclear power, with a very vast number of people in Pakistan who are radicalizing, that we keep a solid and stable relationship and work through our difficulties. It is that important, and we must maintain that relationship.
But the Pakistanis back a terrorist network, the Haqqani network, that laid siege to the NATO headquarters and the U.S. Embassy in Kabul for 20 hours a few weeks ago.
The Pakistanis
How do you make friends out of Pakistan?
A lot of the Pakistanis and most of the government would say they don't back the Haqqani network, and the Haqqani network causes as much trouble in Pakistan as it has caused us in Afghanistan. We need to work with the elements of Pakistan, and there are elements in the government of Pakistan and the military. We need to continue those joint exercises. We need to continue the aid relationship. And of course, we all know the aid relationship when it comes to military aid is all spent in the United States. So it's not giving money away. It's sending military hardware, which creates jobs in this country, to those countries, creating nexus and relationships and dependency on our weapon systems that's important for those future relationships.
Senator, we'll have to leave it right there. We will have more of the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate in just a moment. Welcome back to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate. I'm Scott Pelley with CBS News, along with Major Garrett of National Journal.
Thanks again, Scott. Mr. Speaker, you said yesterday that Governor Romney is a competent manager, but you said you were unsure if he was really capable of changing Washington. You said you were the change agent. Based on the arc of this campaign and perhaps what you've heard tonight, would you care to evaluate Governor Romney's ability to think outside the box and change the United States' national security or foreign policy perspectives?
No.
You said so last night, sir. Then what was the point, sir? Then what was the point, sir, of bringing it up yesterday on a national radio show?
I brought it up yesterday because I was on a national radio show. I think he brings up things when he's on national radio shows. We're here tonight talking to the American people about why every single one of us is better than Barack Obama, and that's a topic I'd rather share.
Then, Mr. Speaker, if you would like to...
By the way, let me just say, compared to this administration, talking about a friend who's a great business manager as a good manager is an enormous improvement over Barack Obama.
Then, Mr. Speaker, I will remember you talking as Speaker about the necessity of leaders to think outside the box.
Yes.
If you were president, how would you think outside the box about some of the issues we've discussed here tonight?
Oh, in a number of ways. As I said earlier, I would explicitly adopt the Reagan, John Paul II, Thatcher strategy towards Iran. I would do the same thing towards North Korea. I would adopt a very strong policy towards the United Nations of dramatically taking on its absurdities. I would explicitly repudiate what Obama's done on Agenda 21 as the kind of interference from the United Nations that's wrong. There are a number of other areas. I would also, frankly, apply Lean Six Sigma to the Pentagon to liberate the money to rebuild the Navy. We need a capital investment program, and this administration is shrinking the Navy to a point where it's going to be incapable of its doing its job worldwide. So there are a number of places I would be thinking outside the box.
And that's time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Cain, you've often said that you'll listen to your generals for their advice before making decisions as Commander-in-Chief. How will you know when you should overrule your generals?
The approach to making a critical decision, first make sure that you surround yourself with the right people. And I feel that I'll be able to make that assessment when we put together the cabinet and all of the people from the military, etc. You will know you're making the right decision when you consider all the facts and ask them for alternatives. It is up to the Commander-in-Chief to make that judgment call based upon all the facts. And because I'll have a multiple group of people offering different recommendations, this gives me the best opportunity to select the one that makes the most amount of sense. But ultimately, it's up to the Commander-in-Chief to make that decision.
Senator Santorum, this is really a question about how you build a leadership model. How, sir, would you decide when it was necessary for you as Commander-in-Chief to overrule the advice you get from either your civilian advisors or your military advisors?
Well, I'll come into to the office of presidency with a very clear agenda, and we'll get people together that will share my point of view. When I was in the United States Senate, I didn't hire people who didn't share how I approach the problems. That's what the people of this country are electing. They're electing someone who's going to be very crystal clear, and as you heard from my first two answers, I don't mince words. I say exactly what I believe, and then I follow through and do what I say. I did that when I was in public life before. Even though I represented a state that wasn't a particularly conservative state, I followed through and did that, and I will surround myself with people who will execute what I promised the American public to do, and then we will go about the process of doing it.
You mentioned your agenda. If you could prioritize 1 or 2 points, maybe more if you'd like, what your key agenda is on national security.
Well, obviously, the issue we were talking about before, which is, number one, Iran must not get a nuclear weapon, and we will go about whatever it takes to make sure that happens. I hope that some of the things that I've talked about here and Newt's thing that I've been talking about for a while, which is covert activity. You know, there have been scientists turning up dead in Russia and in Iran. There have been computer viruses. There have been problems at their facility. I hope that the United States has been involved with that. I hope that we've been doing everything we can covertly to make sure that that program doesn't proceed forward. And if we're lucky enough, and I'm not sure we will be, that if no action is taken and we still don't have a nuclear Iran, that would be my laser beam focus to make sure that would not happen.
And that's time, Senator. Thank you very much. Governor Perry, you advocate the elimination of the Department of Energy. If you eliminate the Department of Energy...
Glad you remembered it.
I've had some time to think about it, sir.
Me too.
If you eliminate the Department of Energy, what do you do with the nuclear weapons?
Well, there are plenty of places in our government that can have oversight on our nuclear energy. But let me back over to the question that you've asked before this about what is the most important thing from a strategic standpoint, Commander-in-Chief. For 10 years, I have been the Commander-in-Chief of over 20,000 plus individuals in the state of Texas as we've dealt with a host of either natural disasters or having deployments into the combat zones. So if there's someone on this stage who has had that hands-on Commander-in-Chief experience, it is me, as the governor of the state of Texas. I've dealt with generals. I have individuals at the Department of Defense who have been at the highest levels, both on the civilian side and on the military side, that will help me make decisions about those issues that we face as a country. So I feel very comfortable from day one of surrounding myself with individuals who have extraordinary backgrounds in national defense and will be able to put this country on a track that Americans will feel we know that we're going to be secure,
and that's
including
time,
the southern border of this country with Mexico.
And that's time. Thank you.
I don't need to tell the people on this stage that presidential politics is interactive business, and of course this debate is interactive as well. And we have an email question, I'm happy to say, emailed into the National Journal, and it comes from Stephen Shafroth of the Dells, Oregon. And I'd like to address this question to Mr. Cain. Stephen writes, I served on an aircraft carrier during the Vietnam War. I believe that torture is always wrong in all cases. What is your stance on torture?
I believe in following the procedures that have been established by our military. I do not agree with torture, period. However, I will trust the judgment of our military leaders to determine what is torture and what is not torture. That is the critical consideration.
Mr. Cain, of course, you're familiar with the long-running debate we've had about whether waterboarding constitutes torture or is it an enhanced interrogation technique. In the last campaign, Republican nominee John McCain and Barack Obama agreed that it was torture and should not be allowed legally, and that the Army Field Manual should be the methodology used to interrogate enemy combatants. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree, sir?
I agree that it was an enhanced interrogation technique.
And then you would support it as president. You would return to
Yes,
that policy.
I would return to that policy. I don't see it as torture. I see it as an enhanced interrogation technique.
Congresswoman Bachmann, your opinion on this question that our emailer asked.
If I were president, I would be willing to use waterboarding. I think it was very effective. It gained information for our country. And I also would like to say that today, under Barack Obama, he is allowing the ACLU to run the CIA. You need to understand that today, when we interdict a terrorist on the battlefield, we have no jail for them. We have nowhere to take them. We have no CIA interrogation anymore. It is as though we have decided we want to lose in the war on terror under President Obama. That's not my strategy. My strategy will be that the United States will be victorious in the war on terror.
Congressman Paul, my spidey sense tells me we have a debate about to get launched here. I know you have an opinion you'd like to weigh in.
Yes. Torture is illegal, and by our laws, it's illegal by international laws.
How do you define torture, sir?
Well, waterboarding is torture, and many other things. It's illegal under international law and under our law. It's also immoral, and it's also very impractical. There's no evidence that you really get reliable evidence. Why would you accept the position of torturing 100 people because you know one person might have information? And that's what you do when you accept the principle of torture. I think it's uncivilized, and have no practical advantages, and is really un-American to accept on principle that we will torture people that we capture.
And
Major,
that's time.
Major, I have to weigh in on this. I have to say something on this.
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, just a moment, if you would, please. Let's give Governor Huntsman an opportunity to take 30 seconds on that question.
Gets a little lonely over here in Siberia from time to time.
Tell me about it.
First of all, let me thank the sailor on the ship. I have 2 boys in the United States Navy, and all they want to do is go on to fight, protect, and defend the great freedoms that we share in this country. This country has values. We have a name brand in the world. I've lived overseas 4 times. I've been an ambassador for my country 3 times. I've lived overseas and done business. We diminish our standing in the world and the values that we project, which include liberty, democracy, human rights, and open markets, when we torture. We should not torture. Waterboarding is torture. We dilute ourselves down like a whole lot of other countries, and we lose that ability to project values that a lot of people in corners of this world are still relying on the United States to stand up for.
And that is time. Thank you, sir. Governor Romney, recently President Obama ordered the death of an American citizen who was suspected of terrorist activity overseas. Is it appropriate for the American president, on the president's say-so alone, to order the death of an American citizen suspected of terrorism?
Absolutely. In this case, this is an individual who had aligned himself with a group that had declared war on the United States of America. And if there's someone that's going to join with a group like Al-Qaeda that declares war on America, and we're in a war with that entity, then of course anyone who is bearing arms with that entity is fair game for the United States of America. Let me go back. Let me go back and just talk for a moment about the issue that a number of people have spoken about, which is their definition of how their foreign policy might be different than this president. My foreign policy is pretty straightforward. I would be guided by an overwhelming conviction that this century must be an American century, where America has the strongest values, the strongest economy, and the strongest military. And an American century means a century where America leads the free world, and the free world leads the entire world. We have a president right now who thinks America is just another nation. America is an exceptional nation. We have a president who thinks that the way to conduct foreign policy is through his personal affects on other people. I believe the way to conduct foreign policy is with American strength. Everything I do will make America stronger, and I will stand and use whatever means necessary within the law to make sure that we protect America's citizens and Americans' rights.
And that's time, Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, the applause are lovely, but we will not have booing. Thank you very much. We'll have courtesy for all of the candidates on the stage. Speaker Gingrich, if I could just ask you the same question. As President of the United States, would you sign that death warrant for an American citizen overseas who you believe is a terrorist suspect?
Well, he's not a terrorist suspect. He's a person who was found guilty under review of actively seeking the death of Americans.
Not found guilty by a court, sir.
He was found guilty by a panel that looked at it and reported to the president.
Well, that's extrajudicial. It's not the rule of law.
It is the rule of law. That is explicitly false. It is the rule of law. No. If you engage in war against the United States, you are an enemy combatant. You have none of the civil liberties of the United States. You cannot go to court. Let me be very clear about this at 2 levels. There's a huge gap here that frankly, far too many people get confused over. Civil defense, criminal defense, is a function of being within the American law. Waging war on the United States is outside criminal law. It is an act of war and should be dealt with as an act of war. And the correct thing in an act of war is to kill people who are trying to kill you.
Governor Perry, with your indulgence, sir, I'd like to change the subject a little bit to China. According to U.S. officials, China is using cyber attacks to steal billions of dollars of intellectual property that is critical to this nation's economic success. Are we, sir, engaged in financial warfare with China?
Listen, there are some people who have made the statement that the 21st century is going to be the century of China, and that, you know, we've had our time in the sunshine. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. As a matter of fact, you think back to the 1980s, and we faced a similar type of a situation with Russia. And Ronald Reagan said that Russia would end up on the ash heap of history, and he was right. Mitt, I happen to think that the communist Chinese government will end up on the ash heap of history if they do not change their virtues. It is important for a country to have virtues of honesty. And this whole issue of allowing cybersecurity to go on, we need to use all of our resources the private sector working along with our government to really standing up the Cyber Command in 2010 was a good start on that. But fighting this cyber war, I would suggest, is one of the great issues that will face the next president of the United States, and we must win it.
Governor, thank you. That's time. Governor Romney, I wonder, how would you manage China to avoid a 21st century Cold War?
Well, China has an interest in trade. China wants to, as they have 20 million people coming out of the farms and coming into the cities every year, they want to be able to put them to work. They want to have access to global markets. And so we have right now something they need very badly, which is access to our market, and our friends around the world have that same power over China. We need to make sure that we let them understand that in order for them to continue to have free and open access to the thing they want so badly, our markets, they have to play by the rules. They can't hack into our computer systems and steal from our government. They can't steal from corporations. They can't take patents and designs, intellectual property, and duplicate them and counterfeit them and sell them around the world. And they also can't manipulate their currency in such a way as to make their prices well below what they otherwise would be. We have to have China understand that, like everybody else on the world stage, they have to play by the rules. And if they do, we'll have open trade with them and work with them, and they should in every way want to collaborate with us and not become a belligerent nation economically or militarily. But if you just continue to sit back and let them run over us, the policies of Barack Obama in China have allowed China to continue to expand their entry into our computer systems, their entry, stealing our intellectual property, and of course their military capacity as well.
Governor, but I would like to ask you a follow-up on that point. You talk about all the things that China should be doing. How do you affect that as Commander-in-Chief? How do you make China do these things?
Well, number one, on day one, is acknowledging something which everyone knows. They're a currency manipulator. And on that basis, we also go before the WTO and bring an action against them as a currency manipulator, and that allows us to apply selectively tariffs where we believe they are stealing our intellectual property, hacking into our computers, or artificially lowering their prices and killing American jobs. We can't just sit back and let China run all over us. People say, well, you'll start a trade war. There's one going on right now, folks. They're stealing our jobs, and we're going to stand up to China.
Governor Huntsman, Governor Romney just said we're in the middle of a war that we're not even declared or we're not even aware of. And Governor Perry said China will end up on the ash heap of history. You've been in China. You were the ambassador for our nation there under President Obama. What's your reaction?
Well, the reality is a little different, as it usually is when you're on the ground. And I've tried to figure this out for 30 years of my career. First of all, I don't think, Mitt, you can take China to the WTO on currency-related issues. Second, I don't know that this country needs a trade war with China. Who does it hurt? Our small businesses in South Carolina, our exporters, our agriculture producers. We don't need that at a time when China is about to embark on a generational transition. So what should we be doing? We should be reaching out to our allies and constituencies within China. They're called the young people. They're called the internet generation. There are 500 million internet users in
Governor,
China,
we're going to have
and 80 million bloggers, and they are bringing about change, the likes of which is going to take China down.
We're going to have to leave it there,
while we have an opportunity to go up and win back our economic manufacturing muscle. That's all I want to do as president.
I thank you very much. We will be back with the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate from Wofford College in just a moment. Welcome back to South Carolina and the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate. Governor Perry, we just got a question via Twitter from Barbara McMahon, and Barbara asked this question of you. Does Governor Perry's foreign aid starts at zero include Israel?
Well, at Governor Perry would tweet back to her that absolutely every country would start at zero. Obviously, Israel is a special ally, and my bet is that we would be funding them at some substantial level. But it makes sense for everyone to come in at zero and make your case. As a matter of fact, we ought to try doing that with some of those agencies that I was trying to think the name of the other night. Starting at zero-based budgeting, and Newt will share with you, is we've got to go there, and everyone has to come in and make their case. It's what the American people are doing. There's somebody at home sitting watching TV tonight, looking for a job, and they're having to budget. Why in the world would our federal government get a pass on sending our tax dollars to any country
And Governor,
without having an answer?
We're going to have to leave it right there. I thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the first hour of the debate. Some CBS stations will be leaving us, but you can continue to follow the debate online on cbsnews.com and nationaljournal.com, and you can submit questions for the candidates at either of those sites. Most of our stations in South Carolina and on the West Coast will continue to broadcast the debate. When we return, we will take questions from South Carolina's two senators, United States Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Jim DeMint. With thanks to the candidates, thanks to Wofford College, thanks to the GOP of South Carolina, I'm Scott Pelley.